Hello everyone. Today we want to talk about how to write a lab report in Chemistry 121 lab. So first we should explain, why do we write lab reports? Well, lab reports allow us to communicate the results of our work to a scientific audience. So scientists do this routinely. They can publish their work in peer-reviewed scientific journals. This means that someone else in the field has looked at the paper before it's published to make sure that everything is okay. You might go to a scientific meeting where scientists gather. They may be small meetings, they may be very large meetings, and you can give a talk, or you might give a poster where you have the results of your work summarized on a poster, and there are these big halls and convention centers where there are rows and rows of bulletin boards with lots of posters, and attendees at the meeting can wander through these posters and talk to the scientists who did the work. A lot of scientists are using social media. They might post their poster on social media, or maybe they will post a video of their talk or a link to the journal that contains their peer-reviewed scientific paper, or they might just engage in some kind of discussion of a timely topic. So that means learning how to communicate your results effectively in writing is a really important part of your training as a scientist. So this is why we want you to write lab reports. So there are two types of reports in this course. There are full reports and analytical reports. So I'm going to talk about the full reports first. So full lab reports are similar in format to the peer-reviewed papers in scientific journals. So again, this is why we are emphasizing your ability to do these reports in this class, because it's important, an important part of your training. So a full lab report contains these sections. So there will be an abstract, a results section, calculations and interpretations, and answers to questions. So let's first talk about an abstract. What's an abstract? What does the word abstract mean to a scientist? Well, an abstract is a brief, usually 2 paragraphs, but in this class you shouldn't write more than 1 page double-spaced. It's a summary of what you did in the laboratory. So it shouldn't be a list of instructions, you shouldn't copy from the lab manual, and you should write it in the past tense because you're writing about the experiment that you have done previously. So you want to be careful to begin by stating the objective of the experiment. You want to describe what you did in general terms. You want to summarize the strategy that you used to carry out your objective. You want to summarize your results, and then you want to follow with a concluding statement. If appropriate, you want to include a comparison to literature values. So for example, if you were measuring some kind of constant that has been determined before, you might want to compare your results to the accepted results. So here's a sample abstract. So what I'd like you to do is follow along in the lab manual. So in our lab manual, in the beginning, in the blue pages, we have the syllabus. And after that, we have some general guidelines. So starting on page XIII, or page 13, we have the general guidelines for the analytical reports and the full reports. So the sample abstract is what's shown here is on page 15, or XV, on the first in the first part of your lab manual. So this is an experiment we did a long time ago. We're not going to do it this semester, but we did this a while ago, where the students needed to separate a complex mixture of ammonium chloride, sodium chloride, and silicon dioxide. And the idea was to get to separate these 3 substances from the mixture and determine how much of each was present in the mixture. So the very first sentence in the abstract starts out with the objective. Then they say the separation was accomplished in the following way. And the next few sentences describe exactly how they did it. So notice it's a very general statement, and there aren't specific instructions. It's not like a recipe where you would say these are the steps that you did. There's no mention of glassware. It just says the sample was heated to sublime the ammonium chloride. It doesn't say that you put it on a hot plate. It doesn't say you stirred it with a stirring rod, or that you put the mixture in an evaporating dish, which is what the students would have done. So there are no dishes in your abstract. So after you summarize what you did, then the next thing is you would want to briefly describe how you do your calculations. So here we say the percentage of each component was determined by comparing the masses of each component to the mass of the original mixture. So there's a sentence that describes how you did the calculation. And then another sentence that summarizes the main result. So again, the student just reported the percentages. There aren't any of the raw data values in the abstract. There is a sentence about error. Some of the ammonium chloride was lost on the stirring rod, which explains why the percentages do not add up to 100%. You can have something like this in your abstract, but you shouldn't have a detailed error analysis. You should wait to the discussion section of the report for that. And then you should end with some kind of summary statement. Maybe if there was a law that you were trying to demonstrate, you could end with that. But you want to end with some kind of summary or concluded statement that kind of ties everything together. So why do we want you to write abstracts? Well, all scientific journals publish the abstracts of each paper they publish. And if you want to be on an email list, for example, you can get all of the abstracts of the Journal of Biological Chemistry. You can get those emailed to you, and it will give you the titles of all the papers and the abstracts, and that's free. I could read all those abstracts, but chances are I'm not going to be able to read all the papers. Even in just one journal, there are so many papers in so many journals that are published every day. It's really impossible for a scientist to read them all. And even if I just chose to focus on papers published in my area of interest, there's still too many. So a well-written abstract should tell me exactly what's in the paper. It should be quick, it should be easy to read. I should know exactly what's in the paper without having to read it. And then if I'm intrigued, I can download the paper and I can read the entire paper. So, but it should tell me right away whether it's a paper I think I would like to read or not. So you'll be writing lots of abstracts for lab reports, for seminars, and things like that. So we want you to be able to have this skill. Okay, what's next? The results. Okay, so in your results section, again, now here I want you to follow along in the lab manual with me. Here I am in the appendix. So in the appendix of your lab manual, in the yellow pages, we have some sample reports for you to look at as models. So on page III, or page 3, there's a sample full laboratory report, and it starts out with the abstract, and then there are some tables. So this is table 1, and this starts the students' results section. And here, this is the raw data. So you can see that these are masses or temperatures that were taken in the lab. And notice that the students did 3 trials. Over here, you can see that this is the quantity that was measured. Notice that all the units are here. Here you just have numbers. Notice that due regard was paid for significant figures. All these masses go 3 places past. Here they were using a very precise thermometer, and they were able to measure the temperature to 2 places past the decimal point. So the results section has the raw data you collected in the lab. So maybe you'll have one table that's like it's illustrated here, or maybe there might be several, depending on how complex your experiment is. All right, what's next? Calculations and interpretations. So we will usually outline for you how we want you to take your raw data and do some calculations and interpretations of the data. So here, these are the student actually here has repeated some of the masses right here just so that we can see how the calculations were done. So again, the quantity measure is over here with the units. Over here we have the numbers without the units, and the student has paid attention to significant figures. So the calculations and interpretation section is the analyzed data. So again, maybe you'll have one table or maybe you'll have several tables, again, depending on how complex the experiment is. So we will want you to follow that with sample calculations. And again, if you follow along with me in the lab manual, I'm now on page V or page 5 in the back of the appendix. So you should present sample calculations. And the way we want you to do this is first you have sort of an explanation of how you do the calculation. So here the number of moles is the mass divided by the molar mass. And then you present the calculation and you pay attention to units and significant figures. Here, an equation is presented. This is Q equals mc delta T. In a few weeks, you'll learn how to do that. But again, here's the equation, and here it's sort of spelled out. Heat energy is mass of the solution times the specific heat times the maximum change in temperature. So here's the equation, and then it's explained. And then the values are substituted in. The student here did 3 trials. A sample calculation means you just only have to do one because it becomes pretty repetitive. If you can do it once, you can do it 3 times or 100 times. We just need to see how you did it once. You don't need to show anything that is fairly simple, like subtraction, for example. You don't need to show anything that you calculated on a calculator, like average or standard deviation. You don't have to show that. You should make sure that you do pay attention to units and significant figures. These equations right here were constructed using the Microsoft Word equation editor, and we will have a sample video that shows you how to do that, because you can see this is a really nice way to present your calculations, and it lets you do sort of complex kind of fractions if you use the equation editor. Finally, you want to present what would be a discussion section in a published paper, but here the discussion takes the form of directed questions that we're going to ask you. So here, again, if you're following along, this is also on page 5 of the appendix in the back of your lab manual. So here I've presented the questions and the answers, and you should note here that when you answer the question, you need to refer to the data you collected in the experiment to support your answer. You always need to support your answer, not just in chemistry, but in your other classes as well. Whenever you make some kind of a statement, you need to be able to support it. So here we will make certain statements and we will support them with our data. We will also connect what we've done in the lab to the principles learned in class. So here, in this example, the student mentions the delta H value obtained in the experiment and that it's negative and that energy is released, but then describes the process of how the salt dissolves in water. And that is something we would not have observed in the lab, but what the student would have learned in class. So we do want to make a connection between what we're doing in lab and what we learned in class. So you should end your lab report with references. So in this particular lab report, the student would have consulted a handbook to determine what the accepted value of the delta H for this reaction was. And at a minimum, you should cite pages in your textbook because you should be consulting your textbook for those overarching principles that the experiment is meant to demonstrate. So I just described full reports. There are 2 types of reports in this course, so full reports and analytical reports. So the analytical report is essentially just the results and the calculations and interpretations section of the full report. So the analytical reports, you won't write an abstract, and typically we won't have a discussion section in which you answer questions. So again, if you want to follow along with me in the lab manual, we have a sample analytical report on the first page of your appendix, Appendix A. And here it shows tabulated data. And sometimes what you'll do is you'll have for table 1, that's the raw data that the student would have collected in class, and there are sample calculations following that. And table 2 would have been the second. This experiment had 2 parts, and that would have been the second part. And there are some sample calculations followed there. So how you organize tables in an analytical report, maybe you'll have results tables separate from calculations and interpretations tables. Maybe they will be combined in one big table. Maybe it's appropriate to do that. But the how you'll organize it really just depends on your experiment. But the analytical report just consists of a table of your raw data and also the results of the calculations that you did using that raw data. And because these reports usually involve an unknown, part of your grade will be based on how well you determine the value, how your determined value is compared to the accepted value. So if you have any questions about how all of these guidelines apply to a specific report, Dr. Stack and I have office hours that are open to all students. So my advice to you would be to, since the lab is on Tuesdays, what you should do is you should get started right away writing your lab report. I know a lot of you are free on Wednesday afternoon, so maybe that's a good time to start. And then Dr. Stack has office hours on Thursdays, so you could check in with him on your lab report and see how it's going. And then maybe you'll do some more work on your lab report, and then you can come and see me on Mondays just in time for you to hand in a very well constructed lab report on Tuesday. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to reading your work.